What does it mean to be a Christian? Or to put it another way, what does it mean for someone to say that they follow Jesus or they're a disciple of Jesus? I watched a street interview video where they interviewed random people asking that question, what is a Christian? And some of the various responses were quite interesting. These are just random people that they were encountering, and someone said it's someone who's in touch with their belief in God. Another person said, it's a definition that is ever so changing. To the question, what does it mean to be a Christian? Someone said, that's a really hard question. Another person said, I have no idea. Common answer was given just saying one word, Catholic. Another person, very honest, said, I have nothing nice to say, and my mom taught me not to say anything then. And then one other person said, definitely not me. What does it mean to be a Christian? What if we had our communications staff, Richard, set up a camera downstairs and interviewed you on your way out, and you were to answer, what does it mean to be a Christian? I bet we would get all kinds of answers from the people in our church. Some really awesome, positive, biblical answers, and maybe quite a few embarrassing answers as well. What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? It's something that we should have a basic understanding of what it means, but in our culture today, sadly, even in churches, we have varying, sometimes incorrect, even unbiblical answers to this very simple core question of what it means to follow Jesus. We're in Matthew's gospel where Jesus has asked his disciples, who do they say that he is? Other people have all kinds of opinions, and Peter makes this God-inspired declaration that Jesus is the Christ, the King, the Messiah, the promised one from the Old Testament. But what we find here is that you can know that factual understanding and still struggle to truly understand who he is. That you can understand certain facts about Jesus and still lack what it means in your life to follow him according to how he calls us to follow him. So what does it mean to follow Christ? If you want a passage to look to answer this question, this is one of those core passages from the words of Jesus himself. And this theme of this passage centers on the cross. The cross is the heart of the answer to what it means to be a Christian. And we can see this passage divided into two parts. First, you see the cross of Christ, and then you see the cross of the disciple. If you want to define a Christian, it is someone who understands the center of the cross. And so we're going to look at the two parts in that way, the cross of Christ and then the cross of the disciple. Let's look first at the cross of Christ, verse 21. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. From this time means that there's a transitional moment in the identity of Jesus, according to how the disciples understand him. And it's a pivotal moment in the shift of the story as well, because now he's going to go quickly towards Jerusalem, where the climax of this gospel is going. It's a major transitional moment. From this time, they know that he's the Christ. But what they need to learn is what kind of Christ he is. He's not the kind of Christ that they have in their minds, in their cultural, political understanding. He is a suffering Christ. He is a crucified Christ. Jesus is clarifying the kind of king, the kind of Messiah he is. He is the anticipated, the long-awaited Messiah, but they have to understand the nature of his messiahship. He's not the kind of king that they would have ever imagined. Like any king, Jesus comes to conquer, but his conquering doesn't come from killing his enemies. In fact, he'll die for his enemies. Like any conquering king, he will triumph, but his triumph is not through the kind of victory of being served. He's going to serve. He's going to win not by taking up power, but he's going to win by laying it down. He is the Christ, but not like any Christ that Peter or we would ever imagine. He's a Christ crucified. He is one that is going to a cross. Many people expected success as the divine sign of authority, but Jesus shows us that he's from God, not through success and victory, but through suffering. Jesus says he must go to the cross, must suffer, must die, and be raised on the third day because there is no other way for salvation of man. So from this time on, Jesus intensifies his explanation of what kind of Christ he is. And yet, we read this and we have hopefully a better understanding thousands of years later as we have the whole of scriptures. But Peter at this moment has no idea what a crucified Christ means. It's an oxymoron to him. And so look at his natural response. Verse 22, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you." Peter is offended by this claim that Jesus would suffer, that he would go to a cross. On the surface, this is Peter loving Jesus. He doesn't want him to suffer and die. On the surface, he's responding as many of us would. What are you talking about, Jesus? You are the king. You are from God. You are going to win. Don't say stuff like that. But he's seeing things through human eyes, human expectations. As a first century Jew, you would expect that when the Messiah comes, he would rise up in military, political power and overthrow Caesar in Rome so that the Jewish people would no longer be under the thumb of an oppressive tyrant. That he would go to Jerusalem to take down Herod. He would gather up an army to march and win. There were many historical records of so-called Christs who tried to do this. And you see this happen again and again, where people see or claim that they're the Christ, or maybe people think that they're the Christ, and they rise up and they try and overthrow, and none of them succeed. And so they expect one will eventually come and be successful in overthrowing Rome. Peter, probably sensing some greater responsibility, he was just affirmed as the rock to which Jesus would build the church on. He probably has some kind of pastoral sensibility. He takes Jesus in private, so he tries not to embarrass Jesus in front of the other disciples. Peter felt like Jesus maybe was exhausted from all the tireless ministry and he just needed a breather. He's kind of a little exhausted, so he's saying things he doesn't really mean. And so Peter's rebuke is well-intentioned. He thinks he's helping Jesus out. He believes he's protecting Jesus. Look at Jesus' response to him. But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." The very first words Peter heard from Jesus were, "Come, follow me," which sounds very similar to this phrase, "Get behind me," but he now calls him Satan. When I was reading this past week, I had this silly thought in my mind. My younger daughter, both my kids go to a Catholic school, and they talk about Lent there. And we talk about Lent in our family, not just in terms of what you give up, but actually it's a posture of submission to the Lord. And you do things, but you can give things up as a way of posturing your heart. You can also add things to your life to posture your heart in preparation for Easter. And Selah, in this practice, she decided to give up chocolate. And she is a very disciplined child. When she commits to something, she's diligently committed. During a very hot day, like we've had the heat wave, we were offering her we only had one ice cream at a time. And so it was mint, but it had chocolate chips in it. And I was like, it's so hot. It's fine. Just eat the ice cream. It's too hot, Selah. But she was like, no. Like, I gave up chocolate for Lent. She didn't say it in these words, but I can imagine her saying to me as I was reading this text, "Get back from me, Satan." That's what I felt like she was saying to me. Like, she's committed. Like, you ever feel like you're committed to something and all of a sudden someone tempts you and you're like, "Get back from me," right? You gave up something and you're like, "Don't tempt me." Now, I don't want to make light of this, but that's how I imagine this story. But it's quite intense here. Right? Many scholars point out the irony of Peter, who's just minutes or seconds earlier praised to be the rock, and now he's the stumbling rock, Satan. And here's what I love about the Bible. In our day and age, everyone tries, people don't apologize when they do wrong things. You notice that? People, even when they're caught, they try and make it sound better, or they try and avoid responsibility. No one wants to be held responsible anymore. But I love the Bible. It doesn't hide from how bad things are. It's honest about Peter, one of the most famous, revered disciples. He's called the rock in one moment, and immediately he's Satan. It doesn't hide away from the fact that Peter, the one that Jesus will build the church on, is now called Satan. A saint can become Satan in mere seconds. Now, this doesn't mean Peter's demon-possessed, but he is thinking from this perspective of man that excludes the cross. And that is the human tendency, to not want suffering, to not go through the cross. Satan can actually use your good desires, your good intentions, your desire for greatness and success, and make it sinful. Here's what Jesus says. You are Satan because you are trying to think of a way without the cross. Satan will always try and get us to go up, 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 but the way of Jesus is the way down. What Peter is doing here is very similar to what Satan tried to do in the temptation of Jesus back in the wilderness in chapter 4. Satan tried to stop Jesus from going to the cross and dying for the sins of man. And in that last temptation, Satan takes Jesus to a very high mountain and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and says, if you just bow to me, all of this will be yours. He's basically, Satan, I want you to understand what he's offering him. You can have what God promised you, which is you are the king. You will have everyone bow to you. You can do it without the cross. That's what Satan was offering him. It's a real temptation. And Jesus feels this. Right? That's why he prays in the Garden of Gethsemane, is there any other way? Because he doesn't want to go to the cross. But he understands if there is no cross, there is no salvation for man. Think about what Satan is offering Jesus at that moment of offer. What Peter's trying to say. You don't have to go to the cross. If Satan said, here, I'll give you all the kingdoms. Satan would, I want you to imagine what this is like. This isn't saying in scripture, but imagine what he's offering him. Satan's going to give up on trying to mess with the world. He's offering Jesus, here, you can rule and reign. You can make everything right in the world. You can bring heaven to earth now without the cross. But you know what that means? Temporary. Momentary. Because Jesus, even if he makes the world right and rules without the cross, you know what still happens when people die? Because they've rejected God? Satan takes you again at the end anyways. Because you still haven't fixed the thing that separates humanity and God, because there's still a debt to be paid, and that is the separation we cannot fix. Jesus knows there's one way, only one, because someone perfect has to take on the debt of sin. Satan has offered Jesus a tempting way without the cross, a crown without sacrifice. Satan's offering a crossless, counterfeit kingdom, one that will only be momentary. And Jesus understands, and Peter's thinking in the same way, right? He wants a king without sacrifice. He wants Jesus to take the throne without the cross. And here's some key lessons about the cross of Christ that we need to learn. Key lessons for what it means to be a Christian. A couple thoughts when it comes to our discipleship. We don't just go wrong by following the worst of our inclinations. As Christians, I think we need to be very cognizant of the fact that we often do go wrong even on the best of our intentions and inclinations. Because think about Peter here. He's not trying to be Satan. He's believing he's doing his best to protect Jesus. He's trying his best to help him out. But he's thinking, even though it's his best of thoughts and intentions and inclinations, and it's actually satanic. I think we ought to be very cognizant of the fact that your best desires actually may very well be satanic in nature, especially if they're around the center of the gospel, the cross. Peter thought he was doing his best. I think this cultural expectation that we assume the best of people isn't generally true, but think about our flesh and how much we avoid certain things. This desire for success and this desire to do our best, all those things Satan can use to trip us up, to take us away from the very thing that makes us Christians. We too often let the world's way of doing things dictate our decisions, and we baptize it into Christ, and we assume that it's the right way, where it actually may be influenced by the evil one. Let me give you some examples. just a couple, and hopefully the Holy Spirit will bring to mind the very things that you struggle with, and maybe bring those things to mind. Right? It may very well be satanic and not God's plan to give you that promotion. More money, more position does not always mean better and God blessing. It may be that promotion and the responsibilities from it and the more money you have may distract you from their commitment to the Lord. It may very well be from Satan, even though it, from the world's perspective, is seen as a blessing. It's not automatically that it's a blessing. It very well be something that Satan is using to take your heart away, take your attention away, take your time away from the things that God wants you to be committed to. I've seen this kind of satanic comment often in my years of ministry. The second one I thought of was, I've seen many people oppose their child's desire to serve the Lord in various ways because they want their child to be successful and to be safe. It very well be that you, as a parent, well-intentioned to love and protect your child, stopping them from going on missions in their life, very well be Satan stopping this child who is committing to follow Jesus in the way of the cross. There have been very many satanic statements from parents who, well-intentioned, wanting to love and protect their children, are doing the will of not the Lord, but the evil one. It may well be, I think about this from a church perspective and where we are and where we're casting vision right now. It could be the work of Satan in our effort to church plant. Just because it's something biblical, just because it's something God calls the church to do, does not automatically mean us doing it is actually from the Lord, because it may well just be us building our brand, or building ourselves, or building our little K kingdoms to make ourselves feel important or validated. Are we building God's kingdom, or are we building our own platform, power, and influence? Which is why, and some of you have asked the question of why we've not talked at all about locations or plans or anything about church planting. And if you're on that list, all I asked you to do was kind of read and pray, because I am very well aware of the potential inclinations of my heart to do something that seems very good, where it could just be building something for us and man. It truly must be the thing of the Lord. And the way that the Lord works is not always the way that we work. Right? That's one of the things I think we should learn from the way of Christ here and the way he goes to the cross, is that our inclinations, our best intentions may very well be satanic. And we have to be well aware of that. Second thought when it comes to this first point. Do you follow a Christ without a cross? You notice that the disciples have been following Jesus for quite a long time. It's only at this point where Jesus is getting much more explicit and much more corrective over their understanding of the Christ. But you can follow Jesus without a cross, which is not Jesus of the Bible, which is not a Jesus that saves. Do you follow a Christ that has no cross? Like you ask every average person out there who no familiarity with Christianity, no nothing. Most people don't have problems with Jesus. And that's because they don't have this understanding of Jesus with the cross. So they think of him as a good teacher. He helped some people. Like those things no one disagrees with. But do you follow Jesus without a cross? And Peter had the truth. The disciples understand, right? He is the Christ. But what they don't get is this Christ goes to a cross. He is a suffering Christ, and they did not want anything to do with that at first. And many of us are like that. We like Jesus, but we want a Jesus without a cross, because we want Jesus to meet our preconceived notions. Maybe some of us, maybe not literally, but we're like Peter. We want to take Jesus aside and correct him a little bit. Like, Jesus, you said all these things that, let me show you how I would like my life to be. Let me show you how our country should really be. Let me show you what our laws should really be like. We have this preconceived notion of what kind of king Jesus should be and what kind of life and kingdom he should create. Peter is thinking from the perspective of man. We want to take Jesus aside at times and show him the way without the cross. Not down, but here, Joey, here, let me show you from my Joey's perspective what the kingdom should look like. When we're offended by the cross, I think it's very tempting for us to want to take Jesus aside and say, Jesus, let me show you what the way should be like. And that shows me that I often don't want a Christ with a cross. What kind of Christ do you have? One with a cross or one of your own making? One that fights like the world fights? Wins like the world wins? Tries to get ahead like everyone else tries to get ahead? Or do you have a Christ that has a cross in the center and his way up is actually down? The way to triumph is not through overcoming his enemies, but actually submitting himself for the sins of many. That's a question we ought to wrestle with. And if we're thinking about what it really means to be a Christian, what kind of Christ do you follow? And you know how you know along the way? This is a struggle all of us will struggle with at some time, right? We all of us, just like Peter and all the disciples, we follow Jesus, and somewhere in our life, we are met with significant disappointment. It comes. All of us will have that moment. If you haven't had that moment yet, you are either a very new Christian or you're a very young person, right? You follow Jesus any length of time, you will come to some moment of your life where you will face extreme disappointment. And you're like, God, I don't understand how this disappointment matches with what it means to follow you. And it's at those moments where the kind of Christ you follow comes into clarity. Because if you get frustrated that the Christ hasn't given you the life you wanted, and you take him aside and you try and rebuke him, you're following a Jesus that doesn't have a cross at the center. And we've seen this. Those of you who've followed Jesus for long periods of time, you've seen people come along in your life, just like the parable of the sower, right? They have a Christ with no cross if falls in their life and then the thorns come up, right? It's described in the parable as the things of life come and choke it out because they're following a Jesus without a cross. And the things of life crumble that faith because what they want from Jesus is a perfect life, according to their picture, not a Jesus who leads them through the cross. What kind of Christ do you follow? It's a very important question. A second point in this passage shifts from the cross of Christ to the cross of the disciple. Hard enough for us to understand that Jesus, the King, has to go through death and suffering and the cross. Even more difficult in many ways for us to imagine that he's inviting us, if we want to really follow him, that your life must also, my life, our life must be marked by a cross. Look at verse 24. The cross of the disciple. Then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Notice, he's telling his disciples what it means to be a disciple. Aren't they already disciples? They've been spending 3+ years with him by now. And Jesus is playing a play on words here, right? About what it means to follow. It's in their time, an actual teacher or rabbi, you would be known to be a follower because you literally would be walking behind them. Its apprenticeship was literal because they would walk behind them and follow in a line. A disciple of a rabbi is pictured in that way. And he's saying, if you want to follow me, you also have to be marked by a cross. And here's what it means. If he's telling his disciples what it means to be a disciple, it's very possible for people to think that they're following Jesus, but actually not follow Jesus. There's a moment in your discipleship where you will have to wrestle with the cross, your own. And that's when it becomes real discipleship. That's when it becomes real or not. He's telling his disciples, if you want to truly follow me, not just experience all these great things that I've been doing. If you want to truly understand what it means to follow me, you will have to walk the same walk I'm going to walk and take up a cross. I want you to think about this. This means there are people here who claim to follow Jesus who are not following Jesus. You could be following a Jesus with no cross. which means you are not following this Jesus. You are following a Jesus of your own making. Are you truly behind him in walking this way where it goes to a cross? And this is something I need to watch in my own heart. We have to constantly monitor, take self-inventory. It's very possible that we're trying to walk in front of Jesus, telling him where to go, rather than walking behind him towards a cross. If you want to follow Jesus, he tells us plainly here, 3 steps. Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow him. 3 parts here, just a brief word on each. Your cross. If we want to follow Jesus, we need to deny ourselves. Now, this is not denying your personality. God has uniquely made you who you are. All of your personality quirks, your gifting, who you are. God made you unique. He's not saying stop paying attention, deny that part of who you are. What he means is deny yourself. There's a part of humanity that is bent towards self. Ever since Adam and Eve sinned, what's passed down from generation to generation is this inward bent, where we are on the throne of our lives, where we are the center of the universe, where we want everything to be about us. And if you ever want to know that that's true or not, you don't have to look very far. Right? You look at kids. They're born in this me, right? They want attention around me. Or if you're married or if you're in a relationship, you know this, right? Because whenever you get in a fight, you notice that moment. And this is something I've had to become aware of over time in my own marriage. You want to know where you're bent toward yourself? When you're in a fight, I'm more cognizant of this now. There's a moment when things are high, tensions are high, right? And it's kind of getting worse and worse, it's rising to a peak. There's a moment, because the Spirit is in me, right? Where I get to that moment, I'm like, I can feel the Spirit saying, apologize, or stop. And those of you who have the Spirit in you, you know this. You can feel this if you're self-aware. There's a moment where you say, forget that. And you just go. You're like, I'm going to win this argument. You feel that, don't you? And that's the bent inward self nature. There's that denying yourself means all of us, until Jesus makes us 100% new, we have a part of us that's bent inward. Part of following Jesus means you become more aware of that and you do that less. But we have this sense of being self-centered, where we want to build things for ourselves, around ourselves. There's a part of us that's bent in the wrong direction. That's why Paul, he says this, and it's very interesting about his identity. In Galatians, he says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That's the definition of denying yourself, taking up your cross, and following Jesus. He says, I have been crucified with Christ. I no longer live. He's denying himself. What that means is the things that he wants to do that are bent towards himself, he learns to turn away from those. He knows how to turn that inwards focus away, because the Spirit's making him more aware of it. It's giving him power to turn away from it. Right? He knows. That's why Paul, he can say, I am the worst of sinners. He's not just saying those words. Think about who Paul is. Like, how do you get to a point where you, later and more, he's done all these amazing things for Christ, and he can still say, I am the worst sinner ever. Because the more he's denied himself, the more he is aware of his own sin, and the more aware he is of his own need for Christ. You want to know someone who's been following Jesus for a long time? They are deeply aware of how broken they are. And whenever you spend time with them, they've spent the entire time caring for you, because they've spent their whole life now learning how to turn that heart bent inwards, and they're turning it outwards towards other people. Deny yourself. Second, take up your cross. Now, when we first read this, we read this as kind of another way of saying denying yourself, because we read this metaphorically. But first, we have to understand when Jesus is saying this to his disciples and he's saying it to us in the modern time, this first and foremost is not a metaphor. It's a literal thing. Take up your cross. It's being willing to go public with Jesus to the point where you will actually be subject to shame, public death, and humiliation by the hands of the Roman Empire. And this happened to everyone but one of the 12 apostles. They died, many of them by crucifixion. It's legend. We're not entirely sure until we get to heaven to affirm if Peter actually said this, but he said, I cannot be crucified like Jesus because I'm not worthy of it. And so he was crucified upside down. He's saying this to his disciples. Take up your cross. It's not first metaphorical. It's literal. They will go to a cross and die themselves. If they want to follow Jesus, it means actually going the same way as Jesus. And there are still brothers and sisters today who, when they say they want to follow Jesus, they subject themselves to public ridicule, even death. I heard stories as I was hanging out with Josh as we were talking with, he says cousins because it's a friendly way of saying Muslim people, Muslim believers. But Muslim believers, if you ever meet someone who's embedded in a community that is deeply faithful in Islam, and you want that person to come to Jesus, and they say that they follow Jesus instead of Allah now, you know what that person puts their life at? They put their lives literally at risk. They may not use a cross, but they may literally try and find them and stone them to death. When they say they follow Jesus, they're literally saying, I'm no longer aligned in this framework, and I'm publicly aligned to Jesus, and my life is at risk. So when it says, take up your cross, to many of our people in the church today, around the world, this is still a literal thing, where their lives are at risk. And so we must not first read this metaphorically and kind of wash it over. It's first a literal thing. Now, living in the Western world, given the way that God has worked in the West, we don't kill people by crosses. But what this still means is that if you are to follow Jesus, there's a public following of Jesus that may bring worldly shame and loss of life in various ways. I've walked with people who in their workplaces have been found out that they follow Jesus, and they had promotions denied because of their following of Jesus. A public following of Jesus may lead to ridicule, shame, humiliation, loss in your life. Thankfully, it doesn't mean for us in the West, generally, we're not going to go to a cross, literally. But if you are to follow Jesus by taking up your cross, it means in such a way where if you deny yourself and you don't do things like the world, you will actually be seen as, and you're going down, not up like the world, like Jesus, you go down, you will put yourself at risk. Take up your cross. It's a public following of Jesus that can lead to shame because you are aligning yourself to a crucified king. And the world thinks that is crazy still. He says, follow me. That's the last thing. Deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. He says, another way to put this is, be my apprentice. That image is of a teacher and people following. Right? You would join that teacher's school. You would live life with them. And the goal wasn't just information transfer. You would actually begin to embody the life habits of this teacher. That's why you live with them. It's how people learn skills of being in trades or learn anything is by apprenticeship. You would just follow them. The place we see this the most, unless you're in trades, you see a little bit of this. You don't live with them. The way you see this the most is when you have children because they literally follow you, right? We don't realize it, but we are apprenticing our children all the time in informal ways. That's why they speak like you. That's why they sleep like you and eat like you and move like you and think like you, because we are apprenticing children all the time. If you are to follow Jesus, it doesn't just mean you've attended a church service and tried to download some information into your head. It means embodying the ways of Jesus. Following Jesus doesn't mean you just put him on one part of your calendar. He becomes your calendar. Following Jesus doesn't just mean you give a portion of your income. It means he controls all of that. Right? He teaches you how to spend He teaches you how to think. He teaches you how to live. It begins to invade every part of your life. That's what it means to follow him. It's not a small part of your life. Following him means you have now taken the path of wanting to live like him and embody everything that he's about. Now, why would you do this? Right? If you think about this, he's offering something that isn't quite strong, powerful. I imagine the disciples hearing this. This is why Peter wanted to correct him. He's like, what are you talking about, Jesus? Like, I thought you were going to go to Rome and win for us. Just like many Christians today, we think, following Jesus means we're going to win in life, or we're going to win our country, or we're going to win some. That's how the flesh thinks. But what is Jesus about? He's more than just the momentary. That's what he says, verses 25 to 27. He gives us this perspective. But here's the motivation. Here's why following Jesus in this difficult way of the cross is worth it. Look at verse 25. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and he will repay each person according to what he has done. He's calling his disciples to a cross-centered life, a mission where you are putting your life at risk to the point where you may die a public, shameful death. Why would any of these disciples want to do this? Because they actually win when they do. Because the way down is actually the way up. The last will actually be first. Jesus is explaining the reality of what it actually means to find life. He's not commanding something here in verses 25 to 27. He's making a statement of what actually is real in life. You ever try to answer the question of life? Like, what's the purpose? How do you truly become human? How do you find purpose? How do you find satisfaction and peace in life? You can find the answer to that question in verses 25 to 27. If you want to find life, you have to lose it for the sake of Jesus. If you want to gain everything, you actually have to give up everything in the world. If you want the truest life, it's not found when trying to save yourself. It's when you lose yourself for the sake of Jesus. Now, here's what it looks like, right, on the surface. You follow Jesus, even to everyone there. Jesus, it looks like he loses. He goes to a cross. He's betrayed by the very people, his own people he's trying to come to. He's crucified, the worst way to die, a public criminal's death. Everything on the surface looks like he loses. And we know, because of scriptures and because of the gospel and because of missionaries who brought it to various places in the world, that actually means victory. Because what he does on the cross may look like death and humiliation, but it means our salvation and life. And he's saying it's the same for you. If you want to find life, you don't find it by trying everything you can do to save yourself. You ever notice how the billionaires of the world are all trying to extend their lives indefinitely as long as they can? Why do you think they're all trying to build bunkers? Because they're worried that someone's going to push that button one day, and they want to live when that button's pushed. Why do you think they're all trying to go to the moon? Or not just the moon, but like different parts of space? Because they're like, when the earth goes, we're going to still live somewhere else. Why do you think they're trying to upload consciousness? Because they're trying to save their lives. But what happens when you try and save your life? Jesus tells us here, you will end up losing it. Because what happens on the other side of eternity? What happens there? What is actually forever? That's the question he's trying to get us to wrestle with. Jesus is saying there's an eternity coming where the Son of Man will come and he will judge. There's an eternity there. And actually, you want to know how you find life? You want to know how you find your truest self? You want to know what it truly means to be human? It's actually through losing and giving yourself up and going the way of the cross. Have you ever noticed how the most powerful, meaningful stories in culture all tap into this reality? I don't know about you, but I rarely cry at movies these days. I cry at weird commercials though. Like, I don't know. Like sometimes I see something and it just like, it touches my heart and I cry now. But in movies, I always kind of like skeptical how they end movies. But the movies that make me, or the stories that actually touch my heart the most, they always tap into this truth. It happens in the most meaningful stories. It happens in the most silly of stories. I was thinking about it. I haven't watched it in quite a long time, but those of you who watched Marvel series, you ever watch Endgame? Like 2 parts of a movie. Spoiler alert, it's been a while, so I'm going to spoil it if you haven't seen it before. So sorry, but it's been since, 2018 or 19, so sorry. But those of you who generally know the storyline, if you don't know it, it's fine. You'll get the general gist of it. There's a very selfish person, very narcissistic generally. His name is Tony Stark, and he's Iron Man. And you see this build up through his storyline. But in Endgame, the world is being, is threatened by this superpower, Thanos, who's got an ability to wipe away lots and lots of people. And so at the end of the movie, right, you see this narcissistic, selfish individual transformed into someone who actually gives up his life. And I was watching that movie, and I was crying. I was just bawling because this taps into this. When does Tony Stark, Iron Man, become the most human? It's when he gives himself up for others. And when that touches you, you feel it. You know it because when all the best stories out there, all the things that make you feel something about what it means to truly be human, it's when people actually give themselves up, when they lose their life for the sake of something else. And Jesus is telling us, you want to find life? You know why you deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me? Because when you go the way down, that's when you truly become human. That's when you truly find life. That's in every storyline out there. You ever thought about what it means to find life? Hopefully you've wrestled with this question. And most of us just kind of ignore that question because if we wrestle with it too hard, maybe we'll get frustrated because we know that we're kind of just flowing along in the river of life. We just go to work, make money, take care of our kids, try and pass on something for them. We just kind of go through life flowing with the rivers of our culture, right? If you ask this question though, what does it really mean to find life? What does it really mean to be a Christian? Well, I hope that when you answer that question, you see that it centers on the cross. And I've preached way too long now because I got really into it. So the worship team, please come on up. We're going to sing one song. I hope you can see that what it means to be a Christian is centers on the cross. It means following him, denying yourself, taking up your cross. Let's pray. Father, help us to see what it truly means to find life in following you. I pray that would come to life in us today. Your Spirit would press into us the life that is found when we go down and we lose ourselves for your sake. And I pray that would change our church, would change our lives, and make us more like Jesus. Amen.